Okay, so it is Thursday, August 8th, and we are here to discuss the upcoming forms and practice changes that are going to take effect by the Northwest MLS next Thursday, August 15th. And so if you're watching this recording, you should have also received a copy of the materials. And as I explained to the participants before, that's what I'm going to be reading from. These are basically the notes that I generated from attending both the 1 hour class put on by the Northwest MLS last week, and then I just attended Annie's class earlier this week on Tuesday. And so from that, I compiled these notes, and then I kind of reordered things and everything so that it makes sense. And basically the idea is to take 4 hours of information, and I've got it all down to, I'm thinking 45 minutes. So we should have plenty of time, which I appreciate. I don't like to be rushed. But especially since it's such a small group here, both of you definitely feel free to just stay unmuted unless you want to mute yourself because you've got something going on in the background. But otherwise, since it's such a small group, I feel like we may as well just stay unmuted and just feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, do something to get my attention if you have a question. I don't really mind interruptions when it's a small group like this. And so, Nicole, I don't see you on video yet, but we are just getting started. And so hopefully you received the materials in the email attachment earlier this morning. And basically what I'm going to do is read through the notes that I compiled. It was labeled notes. Those I compiled from the Northwest MLS and the Washington Realtors class. But first, I just added these important updates from this week, this morning. So just yesterday, we all received an email from the National Association of Realtors with an update. They're constantly updating their frequently asked questions regarding the NAR settlement. And so I wanted to read part of what they just added to the frequently asked questions 2 days ago and that we were emailed yesterday. And I know that they've been getting these questions, so that's why they have answered this. So the question is, if a member is a participant or subscriber of an MLS that hasn't opted into the proposed settlement agreement and allows offers of compensation on the MLS, can the member make an offer of compensation on that MLS? And of course, that directly applies to us because that is exactly what the Northwest MLS did, right? MLSs that did not opt in are neither subject to the practice changes nor NAR's policies, and some may allow offers of compensation. The settlement agreement does not prohibit a member from participating in an MLS that did not opt in and that continues to allow offers of compensation. Realtors who make offers of compensation on a platform with multiple brokers should assess the risk of potential future liability and consult their legal counsel. So that is their official statement about us possibly going ahead and publishing compensation on the Northwest MLS since we're allowed to. But then if you follow along below in the following paragraph, in a meeting with TAPCAR, which is the Tacoma Pierce County Association of Realtors, there was a meeting of designated brokers on June 5th that I attended. And at that meeting, we Zoomed with Charlie Lee, who's NAR's senior counsel and director of legal affairs. And he specifically advised us not to share compensation on the NWMLS, that we will open ourselves to liability if we do that. And then in Annie's class on Tuesday, she and basically Washington Realtors have also reminded us that beginning August 18th, everyone is open to liability again, and no one can guess what allegations will arise. So there's been a lot of questions about this, but basically remember that first off, the settlement hasn't been completely approved. It's only been preliminarily approved. But the idea is that we need to change our practices by August 17th in order to even be covered by this proposed settlement. And then that's only settling everything prior to August 17th. So we do need to be aware of what we do moving forward. And so along with that, as RE/MAX agents, we all use Max Tech by KV Core, which is really powered by Inside Real Estate, but is being rebranded now to Bold Trail. And so you might see a lot of things advertised as Bold Trail. So that's why I have this in the notes. Just this Monday on August 5th, their CEO had a very long statement, but I've summarized kind of the key points as applicable to us here, in that he said that it is essential to maintain the confidentiality of commission and concession terms, focusing instead on individual negotiations. Therefore, we will not enable commission or concession fields in either the back end or front end of the system that will be published on listings. So this means that, there has been talk, and it is approved for us to add compensation information to our listings on our own websites or in other places, right? Just not on the MLS. But this is where Inside Real Estate, which powers our Max Tech by KV Core, is saying that no, they don't plan to allow us to share compensation on our websites. They believe that we need to be focusing on individual negotiations. So does anyone have any questions about these important updates this week? Go ahead, Cynthia.
The Northwest MLS is going to allow it, but you're saying we shouldn't list it.
Correct.
Okay.
So I know that can be very conflicting, and Jonine and I have talked about it a bit over the last couple months. There are other RE/MAX owners talking about it. There are like I was just talking about it at a Tacoma Pierce County Association Realtors event yesterday. There are many brokerage owners, such as our Jonine and I, that feel like we're in a really hard place, right? Because we belong to an MLS that is allowing it, but at the same time, we're being told by legal counsel that we shouldn't. And so it's one of those things where, unfortunately, no one has a crystal ball, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen. But to avoid becoming targets for possible lawsuits or the Department of Justice, it's most likely best for us to not publish it. Because if we publish it and it gets seen, then that's how we can very easily become a target. And the word out there is that there will be people looking for it, so.
So is the MLS going to add the additional field, that request on offer?
Yes, and that's what we're going to cover.
All right.
Yep, we're going to cover all that.
Okay.
So any other questions, though, just kind of about the news this week about, I guess, where NAR stands, Washington Realtors, and Inside Real Estate stand? Because it's different than what the MLS is doing, right?
I think that's the confusing part for agents, is for us all that are going to be doing businesses. If we have a listing and I don't put the compensation to the buyer on there, but then the other agents are putting it on the Northwest MLS since it's allowed, how can I still be competitive to show the buyer's agent that bring an offer that they will be paid? If not, that's my concern going forward. I see this being a problem where not everyone is going to follow that, because they're either not going to realize that the DOJ, I mean, that is confusing to me, even that the DOJ is interested in this. I'm like, don't they have bigger things to worry about? But
yeah, you would hope. But
that concerns me, how to be competitive so that buyers agents do know to bring in offers so that we will be offering compensation. And then as a buyer's agent, it's hard to go in blind, not knowing what kind of compensation you're going to get. I mean, I know on the other side, you have the buyer brokerage services agreement, and that's, you really are going in with less transparency, which,
which I agree. I guess just so you all know, because I guess Cynthia and Bob, you haven't heard, but as a background, I actually was at first excited when the Northwest MLS said they were going to publish compensation. I was like, oh, thank God, I believe in transparency. So I'm I'm glad that they're doing that, but now it's created a problem because from so
Mhm.
many other sources, we're hearing that we shouldn't do it. Um, and so, of course, it's each individual brokerage's decision what to do. What I am advised, and of course, Jonine can speak up at any time and let
Mhm.
three of you know from her office that she's going to do something different, or I know even other brokerages are talking about, well, they might try this for a while and then they may change their practices. There's just been a lot of talk about how, and even Annie said it in her class on Tuesday, all brokerages are kind of scrambling right now, trying to figure out what to do, how much liability they want to take on. And
Mhm.
things just are going to probably continue to evolve over the next couple months. I mean, I totally agree with Jonine. It's hard because I've got listings too that really need to get sold. So I wanted to be competitive out there. The only thing that Annie said to all of that is just that as listing brokers, we've got to try to be more responsive, start answering our phone and our texts more quickly, and answering people's questions, and just really encouraging offers, you know. And just remembering that the buyer brokerage compensation is just one of many terms to be negotiated, and it's not really much different than price, right? It's just going to be taken into account along with everything else.
Question though, question. So, okay, we put in, you know, request on offer, and we get a call from a buyer broker. Okay, I see that you didn't put in any compensation, but is the seller offering? And you know, now you're in a verbal agreement. You know, do you verbalize that? Yeah, they are going to be willing to pay 2% or whatever it may be.
Oh,
Or,
well, yeah, and that's part of it too, is that that's a big way we can get in trouble is if we start verbalizing numbers, because we would have to be really, yeah, that's just not a good idea. We need to say
right.
the same thing to everybody, and it should just be requested in your offer. You know, the seller is negotiable, requested in your offer.
Okay.
And then it's just no different than, you know, when we're fielding multiple offers, right? And it's like, well, write an offer.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to just see the offer to begin to work with it. But it can become very complicated when we start giving numbers. That's been talked about, and that's where steering could definitely begin to occur and everything else. So we need to try to stay out of that. And that's exactly why the Department of Justice doesn't want to see numbers anywhere, I guess, is because they're afraid of our steering. And it's the same thing, although they haven't said it yet, that they don't want us to verbalize numbers. It's the same thing, right? We just need to write the offer.
Okay.
And so I feel like rather than getting hung up on compensation and making phone calls and trying to figure out what it is, just write an offer like we do, right? Like we write offers for properties that's much more than our compensation. We have to start from somewhere. So just start with an offer, and then you can go from there.
Okay.
All right. But I know there are, everyone's thinking of, like Jennifer said, this is an evolving process. So there are agents and brokerages trying to think of creative ways of sending that message out there. I'm sure we've seen it all on Facebook too, the funny memes. But the reality is there must be a way that we can let them know. I mean, I'm not saying to go outside the box, but I'm sure I'm going to be looking into more creative ways so that we can at least let our buyers know what about it. I don't know. It seems like there has to be a way that we can let them know. Or I guess that's the whole point of not letting them know.
Well, I
But
think
I
what you
think
did,
Yeah. So Jolene, that would be your decision. But like,
Mhm.
I know that in Annie's class, she talks about how, you know, the compensation can be advertised anywhere else except on the MLS, right? So that would
Yeah.
include your for sale sign or social media. That, you know, just all the ways that we advertise, those are okay. But at the same time, I would just be careful because we've been warned that the Department of Justice is going to be looking at these things as well, and they don't really want to see them. So I guess that's why I'm taking the stand of let's just keep it all off and just let people know
Not-
that yes, the seller is open to paying compensation, so request it in your offer. Or the other option is no, the seller isn't, right? For whatever reason.
Mhm.
You know
And
how
so then
that,
at least a buyer and agent know.
you know how that's going to go, as is, like we said,
Exactly.
in multiple offers, it's going to be, well, what does that mean? Are we talking 3% in the phone call? I can see a
Yeah.
buyer's agent say, are we talking 3%? Are we talking 2%? What do you
We're
think?
talking 1%.
Yeah, yeah. And we can always defer back to, just, hey, write it up. They're negotiable and not answer the question is what I'm hearing is the best
Mhm.
way to stay out of trouble. But
Yes, it is.
you're not helping
Yep.
them in any way. I also see it's going to be really interesting with the amount of boutique real estate firms and untrained agents. It's going to be very
Yeah.
fascinating to watch this roll out to those that don't get educated like we are today and
Mhm.
how to handle that. That's going to be ugly.
Hmm.
That's what I was thinking too. There are a lot of brokerages that don't educate their agents, and they're not going to know that they can't put it on the Northwest MLS, which, anyhow, it's a little concerning. I think I'll have to think about, I think the best line is to say, do what Jennifer's doing and not muddy the waters. That way, you know that you're 100% following what the NAR settlement and also the Department of Justice wants to see. That way, nobody gets into any trouble.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
But,
and I guess just so other like non-owners realize, the sad thing about this whole class action lawsuit is that there are companies out there that do not have the money to pay what they are supposed to pay. And so they are going to be claiming bankruptcy and everything. And so knowing that is putting those of us that are left that have been covered by REMAX and NAR, at least me and the ones I talked to yesterday, we are really trying to avoid becoming a target. We do not want to have done all this work and built up our brokerages just to go bankrupt. It makes
Yeah.
no sense,
Sure.
right? And so that's why, again, Jolene may take a different stand later on. And who knows, maybe I will too. It's just as of right now, after hearing it very clearly from the National Association of Realtors Legal Counsel and Washington Realtors openly admitting, saying, hey, we have no idea what's going to happen on and after August 18th. There could be new
Mhm.
lawsuits coming up. And then just knowing that Inside Real Estate is refusing to post it on their websites. I mean, these are all, to me, direct signs. And so rather than delaying and
Mhm.
trying to find creative ways, I think it's just time to try to move on with the new way that apparently the Department of Justice wants us to do business.
Yeah.
Okay.
It makes it a lot, I guess if we have clear direction, then it makes it a lot simpler to follow the rules.
Yep.
Yeah.
That
And
makes
again,
sense.
it's not like I agree with them. I don't.
Right.
But it's just about trying to follow the rules and stay out of trouble.
Well,
Mhm.
let's follow the rules and hope the DOJ and others follow quickly and sue all the boutique realtor agencies and they all go out of business.
Yeah, that could happen,
There you
Bob.
go.
You said it. I can agree with you. I foresee that could happen with
Yeah.
all these untrained agents
Mhm.
out there. That,
Yeah.
It'd be a shame if there was fewer of us to split the pie.
That's right.
Okay, so let's move into the details then. We'll start off with the listing agreements, the Form 1A. And
Mhm.
so the way that listing broker compensation is broken out is in section 7A, and you can pull up that form if you want to.
Yep.
I'm gonna pull it up myself. So 7A is at the top of page 2. And we aren't going to get into specifics, but one thing that even Annie said is that when you're completing section 7A2, that amount should probably be higher than the number that you have in section 1 if you want to receive more compensation for helping an unrepresented buyer. And then she reminded us all that, when you write an offer for an unrepresented buyer, you are taking on additional legal responsibilities, risks, liability, and all that sort of stuff. So you're going to be doing more work. So it's probably best to have a higher number in section 2 than in section 1.
Okay.
And
So,
then,
okay, so you're saying, for example, so 7A1, or
Yeah.
that would be your
Page
normal listing compensation, and then you then fill out 7A2 with, if they don't have a buyers, if they haven't come to an agreement with a broker, then yes, you're taking on basically a dual agency. And
well,
then factor in some
not
more
really,
money.
because you're just writing an offer, but you're still doing more work.
Right.
You're taking on a lot more legal liability. So you're going to want to be compensated for it.
Right. Isn't that, I'm sorry, wouldn't that be a dual agency if the buyer's not?
No,
by a
because
buyer
remember,
broker?
the only way that you become a limited dual agent is if you have a buyer's agency agreement with that buyer.
Right.
And so if you do, then you're going to be covered under that buyer brokerage services agreement with your buyer as well. So
Okay,
that's why there's only 2 lines there for the listing firm, because either you're just going to represent the seller, or you're going to represent the seller and write an offer for an unrepresented buyer. Or if you're a limited dual agent, you're going to represent the seller and be covered by section 7A1. And then you're going to have your buyer brokerage services agreement, and you're going to request your compensation in your offer, and you're going to be compensated that way.
Okay, so what I see happening is buyers are going to lose their buyer agent, and they're going to go to the listing agent and say, I'm not represented, write this up for me. All right. And how do we know that they didn't have a buyer's agency agreement with another realtor?
Well, all we can do is ask questions and hope that they know what they've signed and what they're doing. But remember, if they do, it's the buyer that's responsible for compensating that agent. And so that goes both ways, right? Because if you are the agent that has the BBSA signed with the buyer who goes and writes something with somebody else, then it's going to be up to you to try to go after them for the compensation. So we have to really be communicating. I mean, I've always communicated well with them, but I think even more so now that there's more paperwork out there and things getting signed, right? That they need to be aware of what they're doing. And that if they visit an open house, new construction, find a listing and drive by, don't call the person on the sign, call me, right?
But so, and you may be getting to this, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but again, I'm sorry, buyers can be liars. All right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and they're going to say, no, I don't have any agreement with it. Let's do this together, and don't charge me. Let's have the seller, pay only 1%, whatever it may be. They're going to say they don't have an agreement. Let's write this up. And then is there something that we're going to be putting in the contract for that buyer to sign to say that they haven't been represented by another agent?
Oh, well, yeah. And again, that's up to each brokerage and their office policies. But what's been recommended is that we have documentation in our transaction file documenting that we have recommended that they receive representation. We need to recommend that they do. And of course, we have to give everybody a copy of the real estate agency in Washington packet, right? And we have to recommend it. And so if we do that verbally because they're in person in an open house or whatever, we need to get email acknowledgement later, so that we have that for our file in the Department of Licensing and possible attorneys later, showing that we recommended that they have their own representation and they have declined it.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
And
That's
then
going to be critical. That's going to be a critical
that's
step.
what we would have for the file too. And so then it's up to, if they really did sign something with another agent, then unfortunately it's just up to that other agent to determine, are they going to hire an attorney and go after them for their compensation?
Yeah, I could see them lying to us, getting us to write it up. Their brokerage finding out, or that agent finding out, going to their managing broker and say, I got screwed out of a deal. This guy cut me out. All right. And did basically a dual agency, I'm calling it. All right. And then I see, that brokerage going after our brokerage saying,
Oh, no, that isn't
you have an agent that signed up and they were under contract.
right. But see, that's what changed in the list in all the forums lately is it's not brokerages against brokerages anymore.
Right.
It's broker after buyer.
Right. Okay.
And
They-
so that's been a topic of discussion too, because it's like, okay, well, are brokerages really going to go after buyers?
No, I
And
don't think they will.
At this point, nobody knows, but probably not, because
Right.
what kind of reputation is it going to give that brokerage?
Right.
Yeah. Yoo-hoo. Okay.
So we just really need to stay in communication with our
Mhm.
buyers.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of it too, this hasn't really been talked about, but I feel like a big part is also just educating buyers that, hey, I represent the seller. And if you come to me unrepresented, hey, that's fine. I can help you, but I'm still being compensated by the seller. So you're not really saving much money by not having your own representation, and of course we need to be careful in how we explain that. The way I said it probably isn't the best way, but explaining that so that buyers understand, rather than thinking that, oh, they're going to be able to get a much lower price because there isn't another agent involved. Well, no, because I'm going to be compensated for writing the offer for you too.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
okay.
And that would be perfectly fine to say,
I just
because
know what we're dealing with. I know what we're dealing with now. They're all looking for shortcuts and how to save some money.
Yeah.
yep, I know. I've
Definitely.
had buyers like that.
Oh God, yeah. They'll save, if they can save $5, they'll cut you out of the deal.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay.
True.
So let's move on to the buyer brokerage firm compensation that the seller has options for. That's in section 7B, so just below section A. There's
Mhm.
3 different options now. There's number 1, which is where the seller would offer specific compensation. And this is where we were just talking about how, although this is an option, this probably isn't a smart option to use because it's really going to open us to liability. So probably the best option that's going to be best for us to use moving forward for marketing purposes and trying to get offers and everything in this slow market is option 2. Buyer to request compensation and offer. And when the seller checks
Okay.
that, and that box is checked in the listing input form, then it's going to say in the MLS request an offer. But then if you're working with a seller that maybe there could be a wide variety of reasons, right? Where maybe they just don't want to offer any compensation, then that's also an option.
Mhm.
Let's see, we've already talked about that. We've talked about communication with agents.
And I'm sorry, Jennifer, may I ask a question then?
Mhm.
I must be dense today. So can we kind of fill out this form? Let's say in 7 in compensation, we're going to say, in a listing side of compensation, let's say 2.5% of sales price in 7A1. All right. And am I filling out something in 7A2?
Yeah, because remember, that's going to be the total that you would get compensated for if you're writing an offer for an unrepresented
Yeah.
buyer and
Okay.
representing your seller.
So let's say I'm listing for 2.5. If I wind up writing an offer for a buyer, let's say it's going to be, I don't know, another 2%. So let's say 4.5. All right.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Then in the section B, am I filling out something down there? Besides, I was thinking all I would mark was buyer request compensation and offer was the only thing I was going to mark. But
Yep, that's correct.
am I filling out anything in 7B 1, 2, or 3?
No,
No. Okay.
because that is only if
Right.
you're going to publish compensation,
Right. Okay.
which though we
That makes
can,
sense.
isn't
So I'm just working on
recommended.
7A and I'm covered. 7B, I'm not filling out in it except for I'm just putting down buyer request compensation and offer.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Now, on the flip side, it was talked about where if there is a buyer brokerage compensation advertised, it actually gets complicated because we as buyer brokers need to document that it was what was offered. So keep a copy of the listing, or if there was something on a flyer, keep the flyer, take a screenshot, do something. We need to know what was advertised, because then that's going to get used later on the purchase and sale agreement, and it's required in the file. So just keep that in mind, right? Like we were saying, we don't know how this is all going to start to play out next week or in the upcoming weeks, right? You know, are a lot of us just going to remove it and we're going to just start negotiating, or are there going to be a bunch that are still publishing it? When it's published, we need to document what is published.
I have a question. Hi,
Mhm.
this is Nicole Jennifer. So
Hi.
with that in mind, my question, now I'm confused because I thought you said it can't be advertised, and including like those boutique agencies that may do it with inexperienced agents. And then if we document that, can that be perceived as steering? I mean, what is our now I'm confused because I thought the best practice is to not do that,
It
but then
is,
we have it
yes.
in our file.
But yeah. So Nicole, yes, we haven't got to that point yet, but the
Okay.
state law for us also requires that we disclose what compensation was offered by the seller, if there was any. And so this is another reason then why it's really best practice not to publish any, because when we publish it, it has to be documented and disclosed to the buyer. By law, it's required. And the Department of Licensing will be looking for that in our files. And it all plays out later on in the purchase and sale agreement. So let's continue down. And then,
Okay.
Nicole, if you have more questions, feel free to speak up again, but I think we'll answer it more
We'll
as we
cover
move
that.
down.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so moving down to buyer brokerage service agreements 41. So there are some major differences between the old forms and the new ones. Now we cannot receive any overage. That is completely not allowed at all. So we have to write down the most that we want to be compensated. We can always accept less, but you're never going to want to input a number there that you're not willing to accept. And then also, you can tailor it to varying circumstances. So you could have different amounts for different types of property. Say you have a buyer that's considering improved property or like single family homes, but then they're also considering buying vacant land and building their own home, right? Well, you might have different compensation points for those. That's acceptable as long as you and the buyer agree on the terms. Or locations, right? Like as an example, maybe you have a higher fee if they're going to purchase a couple counties over, right? That's totally fine, again, as long as you both agree on those terms. Or you could also have one based on price if they're looking at different price points. You know, it's all negotiable, it's all open, so you don't need to feel like you're limited in any way. Just the big caution is make sure that you're covering what you want to get paid, because you cannot be paid any more than what you put there. And so going to Form 41, let's see. It is page 5 in the package. And the terms of compensation are at the bottom of the first page. So the bottom of page 5, it's paragraph 5A, B, and C. And so if you're just kind of going on a basic plan where they aren't looking at different types of properties or majorly different locations or whatever, you're going to put your amount on line A. And then on line B, because that would be if you're a limited dual agent. Again, it's always your choice, or you need to follow your office policies. But Annie recommends, and I know this is what I would recommend too, is that if you're a limited dual agent and your client's going to receive less services, then you're probably going to want to charge a little less, right? So like if you're charging X on line A, on line B, you're probably going to charge X minus Y. You know, it's going to be something a little less than X. And then on line C, this is where if, say, your buyer runs across a FSBO or you run across a FSBO and the seller isn't represented. So kind of the opposite of what we talked about before, where you have an agreement with the buyer, but you don't have an agreement with the seller because the seller's a FSBO or whatever. Well, then again, in that case, you're going to want more than what you have on line A, right? Because you're going to be probably doing a market analysis. You're going to be leading the seller through part of the process, even though you're not representing them, right? You've got to maintain and follow the laws. So you're going to want to be compensated for all that additional work you're doing. So if you were charging X on line A, you're probably going to want to charge X plus Z or something. Does that all make sense? Okay. Let's see, we talked about that before. Okay, so something that we need to cover is that all active buyer brokerage service agreements need to be updated on and after August 15th. So now if, say, you have a pending sale with the buyer, well, you're already under contract, you already have the terms of your compensation negotiated, so you're good to go. So if you have a pending contract, the only way you would need to update or generate a new BBSA is if, say, that sale fails and you have to go back and restart your home search or something, right? But if you've got active buyers now that you're out showing and you've got a BBSA and maybe it doesn't expire for a couple of weeks or a month or something, you do have to update it to the new forms on or as soon as you can after August 15th, but before you show them property. Any questions about that? And the main thing is it's because, you know, in our current forms, we can accept an overage, and we, as of August 17th, we can no longer accept an overage. And in our previous forms, we could also filter listings. We can no longer filter listings according to the NAR settlement. So that's why we have to update our BBSAs moving forward.
Okay.
As I already mentioned, we have to get a BBSA signed before showing a home now. So although Washington law allows as soon as reasonably practical, right? And kind of up until this point, we've maybe been able to go out and show a home and then get it signed or something like that. That is not allowed anymore. We have to get it signed before we show a property. And so if you get a phone call on your listing or who knows wherever, and somebody wants to see a property, you do have to pause and talk about how real estate in our state works, give them the real estate in Washington packet, talk to them about agency, and have them sign a BBSA. As a reminder, it could be a non-exclusive just for 1 day of showings. That's what I've been doing with brand new buyers that I haven't been able to have a full consultation with, or, you know, where it's just really quick. I just do a non-exclusive for 1 day. And they've always been fine signing it. In fact, I'm surprised. They don't really ask any questions. Kind of sad. So I say that just because you shouldn't have a problem getting it signed.
Yeah, if it's not exclusive.
Yeah, it's not exclusive. And I just tell them it's just for whatever I show you today. And I do want to say, I've tried signing it for like one property. That doesn't work, because if they see another one in the neighborhood and they want to go see it, well, then you're really scrambling. So that's why I believe in just non-exclusive for 1 day. So then that way, if you're out and about and they see another one, or, you know, sometimes they're driving there and then they're on their app and they find another run, right? Then at least you're covered. And they don't seem to mind for 1 day. Annie specified that setting up a search on the MLS and sending them listings isn't necessarily providing buyer brokerage services, but as soon as they start asking questions about listings and we start checking the listings and responding and providing professional answers, right? Then we have begun providing buyer brokerage services, and then we need to get a buyer brokerage services agreement signed. So keep that in mind. I think we've all been a little lax on that. We've been focusing on, showing homes, but our buyer brokerage services do include the research that we do on the MLS for buyers as well. So keep that in mind. Just as a reminder, BBSAs are not required at open houses. There's just been a lot of questions about this. But if you're the listing broker and you represent the seller, well, then you represent the seller and you're there representing the seller. Or if you have a team and your team member is holding the open house, if you have an amendment to your listing agreement so that they're a member of your team, well, then they also represent the seller, right? Or of course, you can choose, some teams choose not to have their team members listed on an amendment, so they can potentially represent buyers. You just got to be careful with that line though, right? As far as how much information do they have and how much communication do they have with the seller versus buyers and all of that, but you've got options there. Was somebody trying to say something? And then as a possible buyer broker holding an open house, so say you're holding an open house and you are not a member of the listing broker's team, you're not the listing broker. There's been questions about, well, do I need to get a BBSA signed as people come in the open house? No, it is not reasonable to be getting a BBSA signed for that, because the open house was advertised to the public, right? So the public is expecting to just come in and tour the home. So we need to allow them to do that. But the moment that they start asking about another listing and we look it up and we're doing research and they want to go see another property, then we need to get a BBSA signed. It's also been asked, what if someone just refuses to sign a BBSA? Well, if they refuse to sign, then unfortunately we need to refuse them services. And we are completely within our right to do that because we legally have to get one signed. There's been questions about friends of buyers participating in tours, maybe even touring properties for the actual buyer that is out of the state or out of the country or whatever. Other people can be involved in the process, but the BBSA only needs to be signed by the actual buyer. And then just as a reminder, BBSAs can be amended with Form 41A. So if you ever need to make any changes to anything. So any questions about buyer brokerage services agreements before we move on to the final section, purchase and sale agreements, where we'll put it all together? Anything? Okay. So purchase and sale agreements, buyer brokerage compensations addressed on page 1, line 17. So that's included in your package.
They changed that.
It's page 8 in the package. And it's line 17. And yes, the line has changed. And this is why I'm so glad you all are here, because this is very important. If you do not follow proper instructions and steps, you just simply may not get paid. So very important. So, of course, we are hoping that agents are going to change all of their listings to request an offer, right? So when a listing says request an offer, line 17A will be auto-filled from Matrix, and it's going to say 0. Because the seller asked you to request it in the offer, but they did not offer a specific amount. Now, if there was a specific offer somewhere in the MLS, on a flyer, in a text that you got from the listing broker, whatever, however you found out that there was a particular number or percentage specified, remember you need to document that with the screenshot or scan it in or whatever, and then that amount needs to be filled in on 17A if it didn't get auto-populated from the MLS. If there was a number in the MLS, it'll get auto-populated. And then section B is required no matter what is in part A. Whether part A is 0 because the seller just said requested, or whether they offered a particular amount, the amount that you are requesting from the seller, the amount that you want to get paid, has to be in Part B. In the past, it's been either A or B. It is not that way anymore. You have to do both. If you put nothing in Part B, you will be getting paid nothing.
Okay.
It's that simple. So that's why Annie has cautioned everyone. You have to have something in B to get paid. And then, as I mentioned before, whatever the seller was offering legally has to be disclosed to the buyer. So that's why you have to have your documentation and fill out Section A if there was a number provided. And then, like when I was answering Nicole's question, that is one of the reasons why it's probably just going to be easier if we don't have any numbers out there, because it's going to make it easier for everybody. So any questions about how to complete line 17 on the purchase and sale agreement? Okay, good. If a buyer needs closing costs, and say your buyer, the seller is offering an amount that you've been made aware of more than what you have in your buyer brokerage services agreement, you can use the addendum for buyer credit. You can check that box on line 17, and or you can use the 22A financing addendum to request that it be used for closing costs. So you're probably going to use one or the other. You can use the addendum and it'll just go back to the buyer, or 22A can be used for closing costs. Annie pointed out that when you use 41C, the addendum for the buyer credit, the difference isn't ever actually specified. And so that's why you want to have it documented. You want to have a screenshot or a copy of the listing or whatever showing this is what was advertised. And so this is what I'm asking the seller to pay. So you kind of have your proof of the overage, right? And then that overage is what you would put on Form 41C. A possible cleaner way that Annie mentioned to do this would be to use just Form 22A and have it go back to the buyer's closing cost, because that way you can specify that difference, right? Like, let's just say, for example, there's a half point difference. Well, then that half point difference is going to get specified on 22A, whereas on 41C, that half point number is never actually input anywhere. So it could be a bit vague, which is why you'd want to have your documentation. And so Annie's just saying that it's safer to use it for closing costs. But of course, if you're going to use it for closing costs, you've got to check with the lender, because the lender's going to need to allow it, right? So I don't know how often we're going to find ourselves in that situation, but at least you've got these notes to refer back to if you find yourself in that situation. As a listing broker, when you're reviewing your offers, be sure to check line 17 carefully, right? Because we have, of course, no idea what buyer brokers are going to start to put on 17B. But whatever they put on 17B is as important as what they've put on line 6 for purchase price, right? So you've got to be reviewing your offers carefully and make sure that that matches up to what you talk to your seller about. Or if it doesn't, then you've got to talk about how you're going to counter it. And you can either counter it just by crossing it off here and making a change, or you can use Form 36. Just if you do use Form 36, be sure that you copy the verbiage as closely as you can from line 17. She knows a lot of brokerages like Form 36, but she was saying for line 17, it's actually probably better to just do a cross out and make the change right there, because that's going to actually be cleaner. And then just as a reminder, if say you request an amount that you have in your buyer brokerage services agreement and the seller just refuses, but the buyer has the cash and they're willing to pay the difference, great. Then you can use, your brokerage will submit Form 40A or their own form. In my firm, it's 40A, to alert escrow of the buyer funded compensation. And when we do that, we're going to want to do that at the opening of escrow to alert escrow, as well as the if there's financing, the lender know that the buyer is contributing to our compensation. Nicole, are you okay? Oh, okay. I hope she's okay. So that
may I ask a question? So
yes,
again, so I'm the listing broker. I get this purchase and sale agreement. Line 17, I will either automatically be filled in, or I'm looking for in 17A a 0, because I'm saying, you know, it's a request in offer. And line B, or section 17B, is that where the buyer's agent puts in their BBSA percentage?
yes.
Yes. Okay. All right.
And it can be a dollar amount. It can be a percentage.
Right.
Could be whatever they put in there. But yeah, when you're reviewing an offer on behalf of the seller, you want to check that amount and make sure it matches what you've been working out with your seller, right?
So if it's left blank, we go mutual and this goes into it, that buyer's agents may not get compensated, period. Get a butt kiss.
Right.
Okay.
0. A blank line is 0.
Okay.
So again, that's why training is very important.
Yep.
So that covers all the material. Are there any other questions? I provided a copy of Annie's scenarios from the class on Tuesday as well. We've pretty much gone through those already during. And since we're at time, we won't go through them now, but feel free to look through those and then reach out if you have any questions. She kind of walks through different scenarios and how to complete the forms. But Bob walked us through everything. So
I got caught up in the truffles, the chocolate truffles. So
yep, that's what Annie used. Well, anything else before we stop the recording?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
thanks
thank you.